We're muted again. All right. Welcome everybody to Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissil, and today we are continuing our deep dive into Flickering Empire. And last week we covered Chapter 4. Today we'll be covering Chapter 5. And last week was also the beginning of Part 2 of the book. So today we will be reading from Chapter 5, George Spoor, George Kleine, and the Rise of the Nickelodeon. Okay. So I hope you're all doing well. Hope you had a good week. And if you do have time tomorrow, please stop by at 11. I'll be doing another live stream talking about updates of this channel. Thank you, Jason, by the way. I really appreciate that. I go and I click the Zoom microphone button on here so that it's on. And I clicked it right before, like right after I did the video. But I guess I missed the click, huh? We're all good though. We are live. We are not in color. And we have a few things here first before we start off. This first clip is the Lumiere brothers, Chicago police officers walking down the city streets. Yeah, that'll be good. So there's this other YouTube channel that's also, I guess, an organization that archives a lot of historical film stock. And so, like, the Lumiere brothers is right up the alley, right? Well, I think part 3, when I showed clips of the Lumiere brothers, it triggered something on YouTube where this one channel is claiming that they own the wall knocking down clip. So that one clip I had going where it was all these dudes just knocking down one wall. Somebody's claiming to own it right now, and the people who made it have already been passed for over 70 years. So it has to be something else going on with that, but it doesn't really matter, because ultimately I'll get the strike taken away. I didn't actually get a strike. I got hit with copyright over footage from this stuff here. This is really crazy, out of all things. But I wanted to get this out of the way since I missed showing this the last time. I'm not sure what street this was done on. And from what we read in the book, the cameraman that was sent out there by the Lumiere brothers, he ended up getting a lot of footage. I want to say, well, they probably got about around 20 minutes of footage with that. I'll have it loop one more time for all of you. Again, this is something that, like, what we're seeing is the entire reel. So this thing would run for 20, 30 seconds. They'd get the shot, and then that's it. And they'd have to swap out the reel and get it loaded in for the next shot. So for a time where they had little time to actually focus on, like actually filming, like the time to film was so short that they were able to get all of this together is so impressive. That they went out to the police department. They got the chief to get everybody. They just walked all day and did this whole thing like a whole afternoon or something. So this second clip here is a snowball fight, and I believe this is also in Chicago, but this is by the Lumiere brothers as well. But it's so great. It's just, it shows people being real. Even if they knew that the camera was filming and they're like, "Yeah, just go nuts." Like this is people having fun. And I remember seeing this for the first time several years ago. I think it was on Facebook or something. Because people go and they take these clips, they repost them on their accounts and stuff, so it gets spread around. But, yeah, this one in particular was really... I thought it was fun. So... These are my two clips I'm showing for today. I'll get more, but these were ones that we talked about, so I wanted to show them. And there's a lot more from that Lumiere brothers film, but we're not going to show everything. Maybe over time, during this deep dive, we'll show everything, but we'll pick and choose. We'll go by ear here. Yeah, I thought that really captured a moment in time. And now, we're going to get back to talking about, I guess, the two Georges and the rise of the Nickelodeon. William Seelig was last chapter. He should be talked about in this one, but we'll see. Chapter 5. George Spoor, George Kleine, and the rise of the Nickelodeon. George Kirk Spoor, like William Seelig, had a theatrical background that made him a natural for the movie business. Spoor was an enterprising young man who, along with a friend, had leased and successfully managed the Phoenix Opera House in Waukegan, Illinois. Beginning in 1892, when he was barely 20 years old. I also want to make a point here to say that the suburbs of Chicago going north were very prominent for those that were either working in the city or spending most of their time in the city. I want to say if they had business or a job in the city, they were living in Evanston, Waukegan, I don't know if you want to include North Chicago. That's in the middle there somewhere. There's a North Chicago and a West Chicago. Like, that's a real thing. There's more than one Chicago here in Illinois. But these guys used to go and just live in the suburbs in these giant houses, and a lot of them are still there. And I know from the research I did on H.H. Holmes, a mass murderer of the World's Fair, 1893, he lived in Evanston, I believe. Or he had his wife and children living in Evanston. It was just all messed up because he had his murder house in the city, and that's a whole other show. Like, we'll probably talk about him at some point. If I do a deep dive on the World's Fair, we're going to talk about him. But as of now, it's like, don't really need to mention him other than that, like, this murderer H.H. Holmes was around during the time all of this was happening. So these filmmakers might have even ran into H.H. Holmes for all we know. The dude was pretending to be a doctor or a just like a physician. And he sold his victims' skeletons to universities. It's really messed up. Like, for skeleton studies, he'd sell a fully assembled skeleton of somebody that he murdered and pass it off as like, oh yeah, this is one that we got from so, like, they just make stuff up and then they'd sell it and make a lot of money. Very sick. But that's what happened in the 1890s here in Chicago. And there's a bunch of I got one book here on H.H. Holmes. Maybe we'll go through it on this channel because I met the author that wrote it. That's how I got the book. But I don't want to glorify murderers. And that's why we haven't talked about him too much. It's just more about, I guess, the impact that he had on the people around, because he took people away from this earth, and that's unforgivable, in my opinion. All right, moving on, continuing on. Although his main business was running a newspaper stand in Chicago's Old Town neighborhood on the near north side, Spoor was a newly married man, and he had decided to manage the suburban opera house as a means of making extra income. His experience booking vaudeville and theatrical acts in Waukegan soon whetted his appetite for show business. Yeah, Jason. Yeah, Jason's saying Waukegan is a big court town. Yeah. I had a good friend of mine that used to live there, and he got involved with the local politics and all that, and then later on he flipped parties, but he was very active over there, and so the politics are really cooked in here in Illinois. So I'm not surprised that it's a court town. All right, continuing on. Some years later, Spoor met Edward Amet, a local inventor 10 years his senior who had been developing a motion picture projector in the workshop of his employer, the Chicago Recording Scale Company. Like many early film pioneers, Amet was inspired by seeking Edison's kinetoscope, an event that happened in 1894, and he was determined to invent a device that could show 35mm films like those being exhibited in the kinetoscope, but on a much larger scale. Perhaps Spoor told him he had the same idea after having his pocket picked in the kinetoscope parlor on State Street. We have a picture of George Spoor, so we are going to show that now. And there's a caption with it. It says, George Spoor and his most famous discovery, Gloria Swanson, revisiting S&A Studios in the early 1930s. And it says the photo is courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. So that's George Spoor and Gloria Swanson. I want to say that's his wife. I'm not too sure, though. I don't want to assume. All right, continuing on. Once we get the slideshow back up. I keep forgetting to do the slideshow. We're all good here. We're all good. Okay. Ahmet had run out of funds for his experiments, but with Spoor's financial backing, which some sources claim was as little as $25, he successfully completed his projector. In their short-lived partnership, Ahmet was the creative one. Spoor took care of the business end. This would be the exact same role Spoor would play in his successful partnership with Gilbert Bronco Billy Anderson when they founded S&A together several years later. And we'll be talking about Bronco Billy next chapter. In interviews later in life, Spoor claimed that Ahmet's prototypical film projector was fully operational in late 1894 and that they used it to exhibit movies to paying audiences at the Phoenix Opera House during that time. So the very first 35mm projector was shown to an audience for the first time in Waukegan, Illinois in 1894. If the projector was being demonstrated in 1894 by one or both men, it would have been a full year before the Lumiere brothers first publicly displayed their cinematograph in Paris, which would have also likely made this demonstration the first time 35mm motion pictures were ever projected anywhere. For his part, Ahmet recalled that he was using an early version of this projector to exhibit films to church groups and other informal gatherings of spectators in 1894, but noted that he did not actually become Spoor's partner until 1896. Unfortunately, there are no contemporary... Gosh, I haven't said this in a long time. Okay. Contemporaneous newspaper articles or other, quote, smoking gun, unquote, evidence that can definitively establish that these 1894 exhibitions actually took place, though the town of Waukegan made a concerted effort in later decades to establish itself as the birthplace of movies. Even as early as 1897, in a sworn statement in the possession of the Lake County Discovery Museum. Lake County is just north of Cook County, where Chicago is. And Waukegan, I believe, I guess that is part of Lake County starts there. I could swear that Cook County is part of Waukegan, but I could be wrong. I haven't looked at the maps in a while. Ahmet stated that he had come up with the idea for the projector sometime in 1893, and that he had begun work in March 1896, and, quote, reduced the invention to practice in the early part of May 1896, end quote. Far more tantalizing, though, are the memories Ahmet recorded in the 1940s. In a hand-typed letter, although in the possession of the Lake County Discovery Museum, he states, quote, I conceived the idea of making the life-size motion picture in 1893. I made a small camera, which could also be used as a projecting machine, in the winter of 1893-1894. This I demonstrated to Mr. Leon Douglas and his backer, Mr. Charles Dickinson. They both said it would not be a success as a means of entertainment, and decided not to back the camera financially for me. I had a great deal of respect for their opinion and let the matters rest. About 3 months after showing the camera, I showed it to Mr. Henry S. Clark. After thinking it over a few days, Mr. Clark said, quote, if you say you can do it, the Electrical Advertising Scale Company will back you. End quote. I did not have a really marketable machine until August of 1895. The company started on a lot of 25 machines, which they thought was a large quantity. I put an advertisement in a theatrical newspaper, and we had a standing order with a cash deposit of $100 on more than 150 machines in 2 weeks. This machine was advertised as the Magniscope, Magni-SCOPE. During my experiments in making the Magniscope, I would give showings of pictures to Sunday school, church festivals, and to the public schools under the direction of Mr. John Bogatt, Bogatt, principal of Waukegan Schools. Our company had sold more than 250 machines before I ever met George K. Spoor. He had nothing to do with the conception or development of my Magniscope motion picture machine. I met George K. Spoor in the spring of 1896. End quote. Yeah, Jason, I haven't shot on 35mm yet either. Although I projected a Blu-ray from a 4K red camera, first gen red camera. And it looked just as good. I used to really cling on to the whole we need to keep film thing, but it's made overly expensive to keep people out of the industry. That's where it is right now. Now, we also have the digital and everything. It's made it so easy and accessible for anyone to be a filmmaker if they want to. But I don't know what to say. My thoughts, my views have changed on film since I got into all of this, and it only changed fairly recently because of the accessibility thing. It's would you rather not make anything because you don't have the money to shoot on film, or make anything you want on digital? Most people are watching on their phones anyways these days. I do like having the whole theater aspect and having the concentration in one place and you're not distracted by anything else. But maybe I'm romanticizing it. I don't know. It's definitely a time that's getting further and further away from us. I worked theaters for on and off the past 15 years. I was at several different movie theaters working. And it was always getting less and less and less people showing up, especially on the weekends, unless there was a big blockbuster movie coming out in the summer. Or if it was at one of the international... I worked at an international theater, too, where they were showing 6 or 7 different languages of film. And so some of the foreign films that would come out, they'd have big gatherings for that. But that was 12 years ago. So who knows what it's like now. Jason, you mean 16 millimeter? I don't know what you mean by 16. Yeah, and the first gen red cameras were really great. I had to sign off at Columbia College Chicago for over $100,000 worth of equipment to use for a week. And I entrusted that into my cinematographer to hold on to all that equipment. I don't know how I had that much trust in that guy. Especially after how everything happened after the whole thing. It's like chasing me down for shit. You know, when you're 23 and it's like you're taking a class for school and it's almost like you're buying a house to do a thesis. I don't know. I got an A in the class, So I guess I did a good job with that one. But yeah, sorry for my rant here, or my off track thing. It's related to the film industry, so I love talking about this stuff. I'm going to be sidetracked many times on this channel and doing all this stuff. But, yeah. All right. Oh, you got to hold the lens, Jason? Yeah, the lens is a. You take film out of the equation, like the actual film stock being expensive. The next most expensive thing, or probably the most expensive thing, are the lenses. The way the lenses are made and how the light enters the camera. I think that's the most important part, and how you get your final look. Yeah, Jason, there I've seen some of these uh, zoom lenses that still photographers I see using for like weddings and stuff. Those things go for 10 grand. And we're talking like the white lens by Canon. There's a very specific one. And it's like the same one that's been out for like 20 years. It's never come down in price. All right, let's continue with the book here. We're going to get through this chapter today. I'm not cutting it short. We're getting through the entire chapter. Continuing on. Oh, Jason says that lens was $80,000. Yeah, you could get a Cybertruck with it all tricked out, or a Gladiator. I'd prefer a Gladiator over a Cybertruck. Yeah, 80 grand for a lens. This is what you're talking about with these feature film cameras and these major studios. All right, continuing on. Elsewhere in the letter, Ahmet notes that the first pictures he took with his 1893 camera were of a horse-drawn milk wagon going down the street after a snowstorm. Quote, "The photography was excellent, and their blank was lots of motion." It says sick. And their sick was lots of motion. Motion in all directions. The horse trotted okay, but the picture danced all over the wall. In late 1895, Ahmet built his, quote, laboratory, end quote, a 2-story wooden building at 421 North Avenue in Waukegan. Local papers would eventually call it, with little hyperbole, the world's first film studio. Unfortunately, the city ordered the building torn down in 1965. Bastards. I really despise all of these, I don't know, leaders in charge that are just tearing down all of our buildings. Please stop it. We've all had enough of it. Local motion picture shows were certainly popular by 1897. Though attendees seemed more impressed by simply seeing pictures move than they were by the specific subjects on display. So the audiences were just amazed they were seeing moving pictures. They didn't care what they were watching. Could have watched like someone drinking some water, and they'd be amazed that they're seeing video. Moving pictures. A letter from that year in the county archives from someone named Vern, addressed to his or her uncle, reads, quote, "Enclosed you will find a piece of the strip used in the magnoscope for producing living pictures. The strips are about 70 feet long and take about 30 or 50 seconds to go through the camera. The pictures are reproduced by stereopticon at the same speed. Please write and let me know if you get this, unquote. In his partnership with Ahmet, Spoor's new business began to thrive, and he quit the Phoenix Opera House in the fall of 1896 to devote himself full-time to making motion pictures. He incorporated as the National Film Renting Company and opened an office at 62 North Clark Street in downtown Chicago. I'm going to the NFRC. Gonna go make my movie. The, quote, Ahmet Magnoscope projector, end quote, so named by its distributor George Kleine, went on sale around the country and was fast purchased by vaudeville houses in New Orleans, St. Louis, and naturally, Chicago. That's interesting to note. Some of the first purchasers of the motion picture projector. Is that correct? Yeah. The Ahmet Magnoscope projector. Vaudeville houses. So these ones that were doing live theater this whole time were the ones that were interested in projecting the moving pictures. Here I was thinking they wanted to film their live shows, but just having the projector, I guess they wanted it to be another part. Pretty interesting. The Magnoscope was also popular with, quote, itinerant showmen, unquote. And this word is spelled Itinerant. Itinerant showman, yeah. Who followed the lead of Burton Holmes, Burtonholmes, and carried the relatively lightweight projector. It weighed about 70 pounds, from town to town to exhibit the movies, accompanied by lectures and or theatrical acts in the matter of a traveling carnival. In a 1943 interview with the Chicago Daily News, Spoor said, quote, in Waukegan I got to know a man named Ahmet. He was a mechanic, but in the evenings he too had a hobby. He was working on a projection machine that could show the strange motion pictures both he and Edison had worked upon. Ahmet wanted to take the picture out of the kinetoscope box and throw it upon a larger screen. I lent him $100 to complete his machine. In February of 1895, the awkward but effective projector was ready. Yeah, so again, this is Spoor speaking about this. So Spoor gave Ahmet $100 to complete the projector. The first screen projection was in a factory in Waukegan. From 1897 until 1902, we had to work out our problems of production as well as promoting Ahmet's projector. The films we made were 25, 50, and 100 feet long, and their subject was almost always some simple action shot. Big parades, McKinley's inauguration, films showing trains rushing along the track. All of these were big hits with the people. End quote. Sorry, Jason. So you're asking if how much would that be in today's dollars? Let's see if we can find that out. Lend you $100 in 1896. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll say 1896. How would I look this up? $1896. Yeah, this is, I'm not sure how I would find this out here. Okay, here. No, actually, Google's showing me it. It says the value of $100 in 1896 is equivalent to $3,807.13 today. You know how crazy that is? That's almost worth putting up on the screen here. Let's see if I'll get this going here. 100 in 1896. 3,800. What was it? 807.13 cents. Gotta add that 13 cents in. There you go. I lent him $100 to complete his machine. This dude just lent $4,000 to have this dude finish what he was doing. All right. Let's continue on, shall we? I just thought that was interesting. All right, continuing on. Ahmet remembered in the 1940s how, quote, children and funny subjects went best at first. I had one picture of an old pig, black as coal, and her 10 little white piglets at dinner called Mama and Her Pets, which was always good for a laugh. Train scenes, panoramas, magic, and kissing pictures seemed to go best. Then the launching of ships went good. Then came the Spanish-American War and the movement of troops, pictures of embarking, and the street scenes and everything of interest. I made a fleet of men of war and pictured many of the engagements. End quote. By far the most remembered of the Ahmet Spoor films are these recreations of battle scenes from the Spanish-American War, such as the Battle of Santiago Bay, a 25-second excerpt of which survives today. Traveling, quote, war shows, end quote, depicted these films as actual battle scenes. Let's see if I can scoop that up, show you here right now. So they recreated war scenes. I wonder if they tried to pass it off as actual footage. Now, I also know during the Civil War, when it was still just photographers, they would, what do you call it? They'd fix up the shots that they were trying to get. So instead of being just in the moment taking pictures, they were choreographing it. They were pulling dead bodies out of where they fell and like putting an arm out to the side and stuff. Just disrespectful stuff from the photographers. But just to get the better shot. 1898. So 1898. There should only be 100. Yeah, I'll have to really look this up for you guys to show you next time, because I don't know. I don't know what exactly I'm looking at here. So we'll look up for next show all of that. Sound good? Sounds good to me. Okay. You know what's funny? I read and then like I ask questions about what I just read and the answer was already in here. Don't mind me. Traveling, quote, war shows, end quote, depicted these films as actual battle scenes. There's my answer. I need to listen to myself read here. Alright. Ahmet noted in the 1940s that the, quote, the public never questioned the authenticity of the pictures. The several scenes produced great applause. The Spanish government purchased 2 complete sets of the naval engagements to use in the court-martial of Geneva. End quote. Man, that's some real messed up stuff right there. Fake war footage bought by other countries to then use in prosecution. It's all propaganda. And that was happening right at the birth of film here. Remembering this remarkable event in 1943, Spoor said, quote, the films were a sensation. Why, at the end of the war, the Spanish government used our pictures of their fleet running the blockade at the harbor at Santiago as evidence in the trial of the admiral who was held responsible for that disastrous defeat. He was acquitted, but we never knew whether the Spaniards thought those were newsreel pictures or they were paying us a compliment for authentic research. That's real shady stuff right there. Yeah, it's the first fake news, Jason. The Spanish-American War footage. The first fake news. Doesn't get better than that. 1896, right? For the era, the Ahmet Spoor Spanish-American war films were not only the first of their kind, but also the best. The, quote, miniature, end quote, ships Ahmet constructed were actually quite large. 3 1/4 by 5 1/4 feet in length, or 1/70th the scale of actual ships. So one scale of 1/70. Just for reference, this is a 1/64 scale vehicle. So imagine a 1/70, which would be a little smaller in scale. A 1/70 scale sized ship. So it'd be pretty big. Probably cover a whole table if they made a fleet of ships. Finding my spot here. Just hold on. Yeah, so they were 1/70th in scale and constructed of sheet metal. The ships were photographed in a water tank 18 by 24 feet in length. Arduous feats of engineering were required to create the illusion of real naval battles. According to Lake County historian Diana Duretsky, quote, the models were constructed with firing gun turrets and smoking stacks and flags. The gunfire was replicated with blasting caps and gunpowder and camphor-soaked cotton wadding, which was electronically ignited and provided smoke for the ship's smokestacks. All of those effects were controlled from an electrical switchboard off-camera. Additionally, waves were created by underwater jets and a large fan off-camera. They went all out with this stuff. By contrast, J. Stewart Blackton's more famous New York shot remake of The Battle of Santiago Bay used tiny wooden ships in a tub and featured cigarette smoke blown in from off-camera by an assistant. Quote, if Ahmet saw this film, Dretske speculated, quote, he probably rolled his eyes and laughed, unquote. In any event, the end result of Ahmet's meticulously made pseudo documentaries was so convincing to audiences at the time that he was invited to screen his, quote, war movies, end quote, at the opening of the new naval station in Great Lakes, Illinois, more than a decade later. So 10 years go by. Nobody speaks up about this being propaganda. And the Navy's even coming up to him 10 years later, like, yo, hey, can you come here and we show the footage you got from the wars? And he carried on, not correcting them. Like, I have a lot of questions here. Today, Ahmet's impressive model of the USS Olympia. Oh, God. Here we go with the ships again. Tune in on Thursdays, everyone. I'm doing Bermuda Triangle shows, and we're talking ships over there. And a digital transfer of the Battle of Santiago Bay are both on permanent display at Lake County Discovery Museum in Wakanda, Illinois. So you can see these actual models of the ships that he used in these films in Wakanda at Lake County Discovery Museum. It's pretty cool. With regard to these productions on which his cousin Billy assisted, Ahmet noted, quote, we had some laughs. One of the funny happenings was when my great St. Bernard dog got loose just as we were making a picture. The firing made him angry, and he broke down the door of the room we had him in for safety. Rushed out growling like mad, jumped into the tank, grabbed one of the Spanish fleet ships and shook it to pieces. Another time Billy dropped the ship when he got a drop of solder on his arm, Riley noting that, quote, I would drop it for half a drop. No pension in this Navy. Joke goes over my head. These comments suggest that Ahmet had every intention of presenting the war movies as genuine. If not for the threat of blowing his cover, the scene of the dog tearing the ship to pieces conceivably could have made a popular comedic film. Yeah. His trajectory would have been completely different. The government wouldn't have gotten his attention or gotten attention of him by watching his stuff. Oh, you got something to talk about tomorrow, Jason? Yeah, looking forward to having you there tomorrow. So tomorrow, by the way, I'm doing a Sunday show tomorrow at 11. We're going to be talking about some serious stuff there. All right, continuing on. In addition to their Spanish-American war movies, Spoor and Ahmet had also filmed real actualities, beginning with modest subjects with titles such as Chicago Fire Department Runs and Mama's Pets, the film of the piglets suckling on their mother that Ahmet had misremembered as Mama and Her Pets. Soon, however, they explained their scope by filming the presidential inauguration. Soon, however, they expanded their scope by filming the presidential inauguration of William McKinley in 1897, which became a hit because of its famous subject. Indeed, it was one of the first known instances of a movie's being advertised explicitly on the basis of its content rather than on the novelty of showing that pictures could move. That's an interesting note. Although Spoor was technically Ahmet's partner in the production of these films, he appears to have been very, quote, hands-off, end quote, producer at this stage of his career. Spoor's only real interest in these movies seemed to be making sure that anyone who purchased their projector would also have something to project along with it. While Ahmet oversaw the actual production of the films, typically shot in his backyard or laboratory, and using local actors, Spoor's job was to negotiate the contracts with the vaudeville houses that would exhibit the Magnascope and the movies. Spoor, unsurprisingly, did not always remember it this way. In a 1943 interview with the Chicago Daily News, he presented himself specifically as a director. Quote, "I remember one of the first films we made," he said. "I got the railroad office to get permission to use a new deluxe $1,000,000 train. Down a long hill on the outskirts of Waukegan came the train, with our mat set up on some pilings at the bottom of the grade, with the camera and me opposite him directing a group of laborers. Well, one of the workmen misunderstood my waving arms and was almost clipped by the train. I had to run him off the track myself at the last moment. You can imagine what a thriller that was back in the old days. Our Matt and I had some fun with those crude films." Unquote. Waukegan took pride in its local inventor and enjoyed his productions. An article from the November 15th, 1898 edition of the Waukegan Daily Gazette Register gives some idea of what a typical presentation of motion pictures would have been like. 300 people attended, quote, Magnascope entertainment, unquote, at the Congregational Church, and, quote, passed a most enjoyable and interesting evening in viewing the attractive scenes of home life, war, and travel flashed upon by the canvas by the wonderful mechanism that has made Mr. Ahmet famous. So there's actually two names here. There's Armat and Ahmet. A-R-M-A-T and A-M-E-T. And I wonder if if they're talking about the same person. I kind of missed that part. Maybe this guy's calling him Armat, but he means Ahmet. Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah. So Ahmet was called Armat. It's just what it is. Alright, continuing on. As is often the case when reading early accounts of now lost films, one gets the impression that if the movies were rediscovered, we would rewrite some of what we now know about cinema history. The Gazette article tantalizingly describes some of the entertainment as, quote, colored war and comic pictures, end quote, suggesting that some of the scenes may have been tinted, making the presentation at the church a very early display of color films. Another movie is clearly described as a multi-shot narrative. Quote, in 6 pictures, unquote. The films shown included Explosion of the Maine, Lieutenant Hobson, Dewey on the Bridge at Manila, Sinking of the Merrimack, Surrender of Santiago, Darkytown Fire Brigade, a comic, Landing of the Cavalry at Cuba, Cavalry. That's a tough word. People mispronounce it all the time. Dewey and His Fleet, Battle of El Caney, or Caney, Caney, Death of Captain Capron, Capron, Starving Cubans, Milking Scene, Fighting Bob Evans, Bombardment of San Juan, A Temperance Lesson in 6 Pictures, Wife Lecturing Husband, She Empties His Jug of Whiskey in a Trough, Cow Takes Drink, She Milks the Cow, She Prepares Supper, which consists chiefly of milk, Effect on Wife and Child, Cow in Distance, Picnic Scene, in parentheses it says comic, Colonel Teddy Roosevelt, and they spelled it, so I guess it's sick means that's how it appeared. And they spelled his name Roosveldt. So there is misspellings in the past here too. We like to think that our ancestors were perfect, but they too had spelling errors. Alright, continuing on. Following some illustrated songs in which a local singer sang a couple of songs while slides were projected on a wall. More motion pictures, quote, taken by Mr. Hamet for his Magnoscope, end quote, were shown, some 33 in all. So he showed 33 short films. So that'd be about a little over an hour. If you include introduction, presentation, and all that. These included, quote, 2 Northside Waukegan belles engaged in their favorite amusement, i.e. boxing. The expression, grace, and agility of the contestants was of special notice. Dog saving child from drowning. The Heavenly Twins buried grandpa with leaves. Some fire brigade and parade scenes. Several home scenes. Excitement at North Chicago. Party waving at train run down by another. One man supposedly killed. So I guess that was a whole thing. So this is quote. Excitement at North Chicago. Party waving at train run down by another. One man supposedly killed. And I guess that was the name of it. Accident at nutting party. Society gentlemen's trousers suffer irreparable injury. Dr. Killern's busy day. Comic. And other various scenes from around town. By the account of the paper, the individual films were shown to great applause. The boxing women picture survived until at least the early 1950s, when it was a popular exhibit at the Lake County Museum of History. In 1951, one of the stars, Bessie Dunn, then 81 years old, remembered the shooting of the film. Quote, Edward Hamet asked Isabel Spoor and me to come to his house so he could take our pictures. He was our town inventor. Back in those days, he was fooling around with something new, a movie camera. We thought he would take a nice portrait of us, but when we got there, he announced, Here are some boxing gloves. Put them on and go to it. Neither one of them had actually boxed before, or even seen a prize fight, but they went at it as directed. Quote, We whipped those long skirts out of the way, and we had a fine old time, end quote, Bessie recalled. Both women thought the film would be something that only Hamet ever saw, and Bessie was initially horrified when the movie was exhibited, but then decided that it was, quote, to the good of Waukegan, end quote. As late as 1909, Bessie later claimed an usher at a theater in Spokane, Washington, recognized her from the film. So as late as 1909, and then didn't say when exactly they shot that though. In 1939, she remembered having received marriage proposals based on it, but scoffed at suggestions that she was the original, quote, glamour girl, end quote. Quote, glamour, she asked. There was no such word in my day. It had not yet come to the movies, end quote. She noted at the time that she had never even been to Hollywood, which by that time it was in existence, but we'll get to that eventually. My timeline for this so far. We're in the early 1890s. We're in the late 1910s. We're getting some anecdotes about this time from 30 to 50 years later. So we're getting these accounts in here from the 1940s, 1950s by the people who acted in these films back in the 1890s and 1900s. The reason I say this is Hollywood did not exist at that time. And we will go over the creation of Hollywood and how that all came about, because it really irks me a bit when you find out exactly why it came into existence. Continuing on. By 1902, Spoor was almost certainly producing color-tinted films. So by 1902. He recalled that when Mount Pelée erupted in April of that year, he used a newspaper photo of the volcano to construct a miniature replica for yet another pseudo documentary. Quote, with compressed air, soap suds, gravel, ashes, and big stones, we had our own explosions of a mountain. That was the film, too, that Fred Meitinger, Mytinger, who had an office in the McVickers Theater building, colored for us. He had 20 girls, and they worked 4 weeks coloring our eruption of Mount Pelée. End quote. Whether Spoor was still with Ahmet at this time, though, is in doubt. Some sources state that the two went their separate ways in 1898, according to a speech given by Spoor at the Waukegan Chamber of Commerce in 1944. He was annoyed when Ahmet sold most of his equipment to the Philadelphia company of Williams, Brown, and Earl in 1900. They turned around and sold it to Thomas Edison. Holy shit. Bessie Dunn said that it was in 1900 that Ahmet decided there was, quote, no future, end quote, in movies. And other sources make similar claims about his comments at the time, sometimes portraying him as a short-sighted fool who did not realize the lucrative future of the medium. The truth, more likely, is that he simply preferred inventing to making movies. I'm just soaking this in here. Spoor. Spoor got pissed of the equipment being sold to the Philadelphia company of Williams, Brown, and Earl in 1900, and they turned around right away and sold it to Thomas Edison. What scummy stuff. Alright, continuing on. And we're getting close to the end of the chapter here. There is also evidence that Ahmet did have a good idea where the medium was heading. In 1897, an article in the Chicago Daily Tribune states, quote, Mr. Ahmet is convinced that the production of moving pictures is yet in its infancy and hopes for great things. The introduction of some successful method of color photography will greatly add to the attractiveness of the views. By a possible phonographic attachment to these colored views, they may be run with the sounds which actually accompany them, resulting ultimately in one of the greatest sources of popular amusement ever devised. End quote. In any case, Ahmet had moved on to other projects by the end of 1902, and he seems to have stopped making new films in 1899, though he did not leave the film world entirely. In 1904, he was exhibiting motion pictures at the Louisiana Purchase Exhibition in St. Louis. It's 1904. And in 1912, he filed U.S. patents for a camera that could record both image and sound. Very good. So he filed patents before Edison could. Very good. Spoor's memory of working with Ahmet through 1902 is probably inaccurate, although a few sources, including the inventor himself and his own later reminiscences, give 1902 as the date when Ahmet sold his film equipment. 1900 seems more likely the date. Certainly, Spoor was making plans to move forward and improve the state of the art of motion pictures without Ahmet well before 1902. In the fall of 1897, Spoor had enlisted Don J. Bell and Albert Howell, founders of the future motion picture equipment giant Bell and Howell, to make a new projector that he christened the Kinodrome. Kinodrome. The projector was ready in 1899 and became an immediate hit, far outpacing the sales of the Magnoscope. Any connection between Spoor and Ahmet beyond that date is unlikely. Distribution of the new projector included not just the machine itself, but also films to exhibit along with it, as well as a projectionist to operate it. The Kinodrome was more advanced than either the primitive Magnoscope or the Polyscope, which had the unfortunate tendency to mutilate the film prints that ran through it. I think that's important to note. The Magnoscope and Polyscope damaged the films that were shown. That probably explains why many are gone. The Kinodrome soon became famous throughout the country, and it made Spoor a fortune. Vaudeville houses were so eager to snap up the Kinodrome that Spoor's supply could not keep up with the initial demand. A smart businessman, Spoor had been described as possessing, quote, the calm reserve of an expert poker player, end quote. His newfound success soon allowed him to reincorporate as the George K. Spoor Company. He took out print advertisements touting an, quote, astounding increase, end quote, in business that necessitated conserving his distribution and exhibition concerns under the new corporate umbrella name. So his distribution was called his rental department, and exhibition was called complete services department. Although on his own, Spoor was not particularly interested in the production of movies at this time, he still needed films to distribute with the Kinodrome. The films he acquired were mostly pirated, quote, dupes, end quote, of European movies that he purchased from a New York importer, and, ironically, considered the litigation that lay ahead, Thomas Edison. I'm going to reread that one more time. The films he acquired were mostly pirated dupes of European movies that he purchased from a New York importer and, ironically, considering the litigation that lay ahead, Thomas Edison. So he purchased pirated dupes from Thomas Edison. That's what I can gather from that. Although Edison may still have regarded motion pictures primarily as a novelty, the films he continued to make were still proof of concept films, such as one in which he presented to be at work in his lab. He appears to have been alone in understanding the importance of copywriting motion pictures. Edison had also jumped on the Spanish-American War actuality bandwagon in 1898, copywriting more than 100 such films over the next 2 years. By contrast, most other filmmakers of the day, including Spoor, Ahmet, and Selig, never bothered to copyright any of their late 19th century productions. Because the vast majority of their films have been lost, it is difficult to know exactly how prolific these early filmmakers were. Their filmographies in reference books and in online databases are all woefully incomplete. And that's probably one of the biggest shames of this industry, is that the pioneers that got us to where we are today, we can't appreciate their full scope of their work because it's been lost. The issues of intellectual property and copyright law in the motion picture industry at the turn of the 20th century were as complex and thorny then as they are in the early 21st. The initial thinking at the time was that if you bought a print of a motion picture, it was yours to keep, and you were free to exhibit it whenever and however often you liked. A properly maintained 35mm print could be screened approximately 300 times before becoming unusable. And that's actually true. The prints so besides the projectors like the Magnoscope and Polyscope here that would damage the films through each playthrough, no matter what, if you had a perfect projector that never damaged the film would still only run about 300 times before starting to fall apart. This was a line of thinking that would soon change as distribution companies realized there was more money to be made in a system of licensing the rental of film prints for a finite period of time. Although he had gone into the motion picture business mainly as a distributor, George Spoor would soon shift his energies into production, ceding the distribution duties to his colleague George Kleine, who soon established himself as the undisputed king of film distribution in the United States. It's quite a title. The story of the George Spoor-Edward Ahmet relationship is a good illustration of how, in the film industry of the late 19th century, the divisions between artist and inventor, scientist and businessman, producer and distributor were often blurred. If you were in the business of making movies at the time, you probably also sold them, along with projectors to exhibit them. In the following years, the lines between production, distribution, and exhibition would become more clearly drawn. The most important development in the film distribution business in the early 20th century was in the founding of, quote, film exchanges, end quote. These companies were so named because they specialized in renting or trading film prints exclusively, i.e., without the projection equipment to go along with them. George Kleine had a leg up on the competition in the movie distribution business because he had set up the Kleine Optical Company in Chicago in 1893, selling optical devices and stereopticons before the advent of motion picture projection. And you might be asking, what's a stereopticon? Because I've already mentioned it once here. It's definitely not a transformer, I'll tell you that. Alright, we got a photo. We will display photo. Just give me a second. Just so we have a visual here. This is the stereopticon. So really it's projecting two projectors. I'll have to read up on this some more myself because I'm not too familiar with it. I'll read one paragraph from Wikipedia. I don't like doing that, but I'll just for this one. The stereopticon is a slide projector, a relatively powerful magic lantern, which has two lenses, usually one above the other, and has mainly been used to project photographic images. These devices date back to the mid-19th century yet, and they were a popular form of entertainment and education before the advent of moving pictures. Magic lanterns originally used rather weak light sources like candles or oil lamps that produced projections that were just large and strong enough to entertain small groups of people. During the 19th century, stronger light sources like limelight became available. There's where your term "in the limelight" comes up. So this actually dates back even further than the time period we're talking about. This says here, for the dissolving views, lantern shows that were popularized by Henry Langdon Child since the late 1830s, lanternists needed to be able to project two aligned pictures in the same spot on a screen, gradually dimming a first picture while revealing a second one. This could be done with two lanterns, but soon biunal lanterns with two objectives placed one above the other became common. So I'm still trying to figure out how this machine would work. So we're just relaying photographs two at a time. We're showing one. We have the second one prepped. When the second one is shown as the first one taken out, and you put a new picture in, and then you just switch back and forth up and down, and then that's your projector. That seems like what it is. And so, one other distinction here. This is, in fact, a stereopticon, but it's not to be confused with the stereoscope, which is a device with two images for each eye, and you put it over your face like VR, and then you get that 3D image that way. That's a stereoscope. Sometimes you even they had like a little handle to hold it, but the things are heavy. There's one at the Niles Museum here. I'm sure if you ask about it, they'll be able to show you. It's on the 3rd floor. Just ask them if you ever go there. Cool. Let's continue. Okay. I'm just going to reread this. In 1896, the company began selling filmmaking equipment, and in 1901 it became the main selling agent not only for local Chicago filmmakers, but for Biograph and Edison as well. Among the Edison films that Kleine distributed were pirated dupes of European films. In 1903, the French company Pathé Frères, not sure how to say that. I'm going to spell it out for you. It's 2 words. Pathéfrères. The leading film studio in Europe successfully curtailed the bootlegging of their films by opening offices in New York and overseeing their own distribution in the United States. That's the way to do it. Beginning in 1904, Kleine began distributing films directly from Path on a regular basis, much to Edison's dismay. Yeah, because Edison was buying the pirated movies. And the import of European films would remain Kleine's bread and butter until he retired, a wealthy man in the late 1920s. So I just want to mention about Edison again here. We're dealing with someone who was obviously very hurt by others stealing his work, and he got so bitter about it, he just went around and took the work of all other filmmakers after that. It's what it sure sounds like to me. That he got so bitter from being duped himself that he went to go dupe everyone else just to make a quick buck. So that's how he viewed most of this stuff, it seems here. But I still give Edison a lot of praise and credit for what he does after all of this. And we'll get into that soon. Not today, but we will get into that soon. The deal with Path led to a serious falling out between Edison and Kleine. Kleine had been responsible for a whopping 30% of Edison's film sales in 1903, but Edison was willing to sever all business ties over what he saw as Kleine's betrayal. You don't work for me anymore? I cut you. What would you call that? That's almost a psychopathic tendency right there. He's going to cut off his own leg to spite his arm. On October 1st, 1904, Edison revoked the special discount he had given Kleine since their exclusivity agreement in 1899, and then he quickly established his own Chicago offices under the management of John Hardin, the former head of Montgomery Ward's optical department. This is all stuff I had no clue about, but here we're learning today about it. Kleine countered by first firing off a letter addressed to his, quote, good customers, end quote, that explained the rift. He then publicly denounced Edison's piracy in a print ad that began, quote, there are various kinds of dupes. The dictionary describes one kind as a, quote, victim of deception, end quote. And concluded, quote, in no case will dupes be delivered to our customers when the original can be obtained. In some instances, the originals can be purchased at the same prices as the dupes, and others at a slightly advanced price. Kleine would resume distribution of Edison's films in 1908 with the advent of the Motion Picture Patents Company, but Edison would never again be his primary client. In fact, Kleine would look increasingly to European filmmakers from whom he could directly import. Soon there were more than 15 film exchanges operating in Chicago, which controlled an astounding 80%, 80, of the nationwide distribution market. The other serious shift that occurred in the film industry in the first decade of the 20th century was the transition of exhibition away from the vaudeville halls and penny arcades and toward the newly established storefront theaters known as, quote, Nickelodeons, end quote. So named because of their 5-cent admission price. I guess Dimeodeon wouldn't roll off the tongue as well either, huh? Odeon means theater, for those of you that don't know that. As it became increasingly obvious that the movies were more than a passing fad, enterprising exhibitors began opening theaters in metropolitan centers, most of which were converted storefronts, exclusively for the purpose of showcasing motion pictures. Once again, Chicago would be at the forefront of this new phenomenon. Carl Laemmle, spelled Laemmle, was a hardworking 39-year-old German immigrant who owned a successful clothing store in Milwaukee and became involved in the movie business by chance after a business trip to Chicago in 1906. Tired of the clothing business, is it Laemmle? Carl Laemmle? That's what it sounds like. Laemmle originally ventured to the second city with the purpose of investing in a chain of 5 and 10 cent stores. So that's all dashed. 5 and 10 cent. It's all dashed. Those are the dollar stores. They used to have nickel stores. Now we have $5 stores. Got 5 below. It's soon going to be $10 stores, right? If we don't get rid of the fiat. After attending a motion picture show at a Nickelodeon near his downtown hotel, however, the entrepreneur changed his mind. In an unpublished manuscript written in 1927, Laemmle colorfully described his excitement at seeing movies in a theater for the very first time more than 20 years earlier. Quote, "Not only was every seat occupied, but the right and left sides were jammed with standing patrons. The rear was also filled, and after waiting 10 minutes, the duration of the performance, at which time people trickled out, I was finally able to secure a seat." End quote. Laemmle estimated there were 500 people in attendance at his first picture show. Only 1 month later, Laemmle opened his own Nickelodeon in Chicago, a 214-seat theater on Milwaukee Avenue that he painted white and named rather unimaginatively the White Front Theater. Okay, we have another task to take care of here. We got to look up and see what that is today, because I do not know. He painted it white and just called it the White Front Theater. Oh, it's like you have the creatives and you have the businesses. Like you have the business-minded people, you have the creative-minded people. The business-minded people will call it the White Front Theater. And the creative people would call it something of historical significance. I don't know. The White Front Theater was opened by Carl Laemmle. It's 1906. So what is it today? It was closed in 1911 and converted to retail use as a 5 and 10 cent store. No! Oh, shit. Laemmle could not escape its fate. The theater turned into the store that he tried to avoid. The building was last used as a Foot Locker store and was demolished in 2015. Again, our history is being erased. Laemmle's masterstrokes as an exhibitor, however, were open to this theater in a residential neighborhood far from the Loop, where all of the other Nickelodeons were concentrated, and to keep it immaculately clean in order to entice more female patrons. Both gambles paid off. According to historian Bernard F. Dick, quote, "Located next to a milliner at 909 North Milwaukee Avenue, 1257 North Milwaukee Avenue in contemporary street numbering, the White Front was accessible by trolley." And we just got a date here, so I'm going to look that up. Or we got a location. Got a location here. Milwaukee Avenue is literally a walk down the street from where I am right here. So those of you that are not familiar with Milwaukee Avenue here in Illinois, we have a diagonal street that runs. Here, let me get this screen share going. How are you guys doing out there? We're almost to the end. We're about an hour and a half in. Woo! We have less than a page and a half left. And I'm not sure what's going on with this little thing here. Window. I want to capture the window, not that. All right. Perfect. So here we have Milwaukee Avenue. We got the Foot Locker right in the middle there. Oh, Milwaukee and Ashland. All right. And let's look at the front of this theater. Is this it? That's looking to Ashland. Okay. This says Shoes Center. It's 1255. So it's probably this one right here. 57 right here. With the gate in front of it. So it said it was... Did it say it was demolished? I don't think this is demolished, because look at this. That's still from the same time. We have remnants of the original building here. And they really jacked it up. So this one was probably it. 1257. Yeah, that's it. Surprisingly, it's still here on Google. So this was the little 217... Maybe this whole building. I want to say this whole building, because these numbers were named later. I want to say this whole building here that you're seeing, this square, that is the 909 North Milwaukee. And that's before they changed all the numbers. And I don't know why they changed the numbers. That's going to be something to look into another day. Oh, wow. So there was the White Front Theater. That's where it used to be. Continuing on in the book here. Since Saturday was a shopping day, Carl thought that by mid-afternoon shoppers might want a diversion before returning home. And with sundown so early, observant Jews would drop in later. The gimmick worked. When the doors closed, Carl had taken in $200. Not bad considering the price of admission. Yeah, 5 cents. He made $200 by the end of the day. Thereafter, man, you had 2,000 people there? 10 shows. 2,000 people? If it was all packed. Thereafter, the White Front operated on a regular morning through evening schedule, which meant the difference between 1,400 paid admissions on February 24th and 4,000 the next day. So I'll reread that here. Thereafter, the White Front operated on a regular morning through evening schedule, which meant the difference between 1,400 paid admissions on February 24th and 4,000 the next day. End quote. Lamel's great financial success with the White Front Theater would mark the beginning of an empire, and he gradually expanded his operations to include film production, founding the Independent Moving Pictures Company in 1909, which became Universal Pictures in 1912. One of the oldest and most durable film studios in the history of Hollywood. The boy Lamel, hired to play piano at the White Front Theater, Sam Katz, with his partners, the Balaban brothers, went on to build some of Chicago's greatest movie palaces, including the Uptown Theater and the Chicago Theater, both of which still stand. So I've been calling this guy Lamel, Lamley, but his name's spelled Laemmle. He's French, so I can't pronounce it correctly. And then the piano player that he hired, Sam Katz, with his partners, the Balaban brothers, they made the Uptown Theater and the Chicago Theater. Amazing stuff, because those are still around. And then we have a picture of Carl, so we're going to show that right now. It says Carl Laemmle in Chicago in 1916, Chicago Daily News. Photo courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. There we go. He looks like an approachable dude, right? I feel like I could walk up to him back in his day and talk film with him. See what he's doing, what his theater's doing. See if I can get some work over there. That would have been a cool time. One more page left. Told you we were getting near the end here. But no worries. We will be back next week with this. So let's finish this up and call it a day. 1907 saw an explosion of Nickelodeons in Chicago's Loop and on the near north and west sides. There were at least 158 such theaters in operation in Chicago that year in 1907. And more than 300 the following year. So it nearly doubled from 1907 to 1908. This was in addition to the vaudeville houses that still regularly screened motion pictures. So, for example, here, we have a theater that still stands today. It got recently renovated. Who's it by? Same theater owner as one in, I think, St. Charles. If you know, you know. But it's the Des Plaines Theater. It's in the town next door to me here, going west. And that used to be a vaudeville theater. And I did work there in the late 2010s. Probably like 13 years ago. So I got to see all of the original, like, back of the stage. So I got to see all the wood that was used, like, for the floorboards, for the side paneling and stuff. This place was built to do live theater shows, and eventually all these vaudeville theaters got converted into motion picture theaters. So the Des Plaines Theater survived by doing that, but then it stopped being a movie theater from like the early 2000s to a few years ago. And it would only show certain things like live theater performances, or it would show the occasional movie, or it would have Battle of the Bands there. But now it's a full-fledged entertainment venue. You got bands showing up. I don't think they play movies there, but they could. I haven't looked at it lately, but they did redesign the entire build. Like, they gutted the whole thing out, but they kept the building. Honesty. There you go. Thank you. That's my mama. Thank you, Mom. Ron Onesti. So yeah, Ron Onesti from St. Charles. He owns a theater in St. Charles. He bought the one in Des Plaines, fixed it up, and now it's running just as good as the other ones around here. All right, continuing on, and we're just about done here. We're in the last two paragraphs. Film historian Lauren Rabinovitz earthily describes the city's early Nickelodeon scene. Quote, there were nickel storefront theaters along State Street to the south, the Vice District known as Whiskey Row, and strung out on Halsted to the west in neighborhoods that were filled with storefront brothels, penny arcades, dime museums, wine rooms, and saloons. On North Clark to the north of the Loop and along the main thoroughfares of immigrant and working class neighborhoods. End quote. Rabinovitz believes that the phenomenal success of the movies in Chicago at the time was directly attributable to the sharp rise in immigration. From 1890 to 1910, the foreign-born population of the U.S. had risen by an astonishing 15 million people. Chicago was a central destination for many European immigrants who were constantly arriving and contributing disproportionately to the city's population growth. The movies, with their purely visual and universal language, were the best form of cheap entertainment for newly arrived immigrants who did not speak English. That's a very good thing to point out. Something to distinct here is that motion pictures were so universally accepted because there was no sound and therefore no language barrier. So everyone could watch these silent movies and be enjoyed or get enjoyment from them because all they had to do was watch the interaction of the people on the screen and understand what's going on without any language. I think that's pretty cool. All right, final paragraph for today, and then we will wrap this show up. With the proliferation of film exchanges and Nickelodeons, Chicago had distinguished itself as the most important city in the United States for film distribution and exhibition. You couldn't get your films moved around the world, and you couldn't show them to anyone unless you came to Chicago to find the people to help you to do it. This success would prove a boon to local producers. The Chicago filmmakers grew increasingly confident and ambitious. In 1907, George Spoor teamed with Gilbert Anderson to form the formidable S&A Studios. The same year saw William Selig considerably expand the scope of his own production empire. When both studios agreed to join Thomas Edison's trust, it seemed as though they would have a monopoly on film production in the Midwest. For the next several years, Chicago would be America's filmmaking capital. This golden age would be short-lived, however. No sooner were the owners of the Chicago movie studios granted a glimpse of paradise than they found the gates of heaven being slammed shut in their faces for good. Now that's an odd visual. Why would that happen? Guess we'll have to find out next week when we go and read about Gilbert Bronco Billy Anderson in Chapter 6. So that is where we will end today's show. Man, we're learning a lot. We're learning a whole bunch about Edison here. I like the prominence of Selig in this book that we're reading, and then the two Georges today and the Nickelodeons. I think that's excellent. So we're getting through it. Again, if you want to pick this book up, here's the title. And again, I believe I got this either on eBay or Amazon. But Amazon, you could find it on paperback for, I believe, like $25. And this is the hardcover. Amazon has it for $80 in the hardcover. But I don't believe I paid that much when it first came out. So, all right, everybody. This is it. This is the end of part 5. So, thank you all for being here. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. And the rest of the week, you know, I have my deep dives going on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Coral Castle and Bermuda Triangle. We got today's shows every Saturday at 11. And tomorrow's show about me and this channel. Be sure to tune in tomorrow on that. And same time, 11:05, I'll go live. And we are going to be talking about some serious stuff tomorrow. So get ready. We're going to have a little bit of a crowd here too. Because I'm making sure some people see what I have to say. Because I got a lot to say tomorrow. All right? So until the next one, class dismissed.